that you brought with you.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. Oh, good morning, co-chairs, ranking members, vice chairs. I'm so happy to be here to speak today. I'd like to focus my remarks on SB 491, which contain my office's recommendations for implementing universal absentee voting. At its core, the bill is about making sure that expanded access is implemented in a way that is secure, transparent, and workable for the municipalities. Several provisions in the bill are designed to address operational challenges that election officials have identified over time. First and foremost, this bill establishes a ballot curing process so that voters who make minor correctable errors, like a missing signature, have the opportunity to fix them rather than having their ballot rejected. Second, it creates a ballot tracking system allowing voters to follow their ballot throughout the process. This adds an important layer of transparency and helps build confidence in the system. Third, the bill allows for earlier processing of absentee ballots on Election Day, which will help local officials manage increasing volume more effectively and support more timely counting. And finally, it transitions Connecticut to a simplified single envelope system, which reduces voter confusion, minimizes avoidable mistakes, and makes the process easier to administer at the local level. Just as importantly, the bill recognizes that absentee voting has to work in coordination with our early voting system, because I think we want a system that is clear for voters and manageable for towns, one that doesn't create duplicative processes or unnecessary costs. My position is that these administrative improvements should be in place before full implementation, but at the same time, I recognize that the will of the voters have already spoken, and for many, they've already waited too long. For that reason, we've outlined a phased approach that allows us to expand access while also doing so responsibly and sustainably. I've also submitted written testimony on HB 5544 and HB 5555. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Questions from the committee? Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, good morning. Nice to see you. Just saw you over at the Bushnell.
Yeah.
So we both raced back over here through the cold to make it to this meeting together, and I'm delighted that we have this opportunity. Since I didn't get to see you,
Yes.
I guess it was earlier.
In passing.
Yeah, the last week we had a public hearing.
Oh, I was here, but you were not.
Oh, you must have been here at the end of the meeting.
I was at a poll worker appreciation event in Brookfield, and I could not cancel, so I showed up later.
Yeah, I competing meetings as well, but I was watching intently, waiting for my opportunity to have you on the stand. But I have you now.
The day has come.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
The witness stand. Yes, exactly. So I have a few questions today, but starting with the bill that I think is probably the most important one on the agenda, with Senate Bill 491, which is all about implementing the constitutional changes into our statute. And obviously the people of Connecticut have chosen to expand no excuse absentee voting. I don't know that they had the proper question put in front of them necessarily, and I don't think that the results were overwhelming necessarily. But if this does mean that folks will have ultimately more access to voting, I'm in favor of it, as long as we preserve the integrity of the vote. So I noticed one of the things you mentioned, and a major component of the changes that are going to be implemented, is the elimination of circulators. And I'll let you respond, but I just say I appreciate that because it's an issue I brought up year after year, which is that if you empower political campaigns and different third parties to distribute ballot applications, effectively, they're going to target the people they think are going to vote for their candidate or their position, right? And that means that other people are left out of the equation. But what my concern is that by doing this, are you enabling a state entity, Secretary of State's office, or municipal governments to take the place of those entities and actually, much like during COVID, send out all the ballot applications to all the registered voters through you, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you for the question. We have not outlined a specific measure, but we have had discussions with various people. Although I was not present for the earlier part of Friday's hearing, I did listen to the testimony from the Town Clerks Association, from the State Elections Enforcement Commission, and I thought it was interesting that SEEK had some concerns about how they felt the application process created evidence for them in some cases. I like what the town clerks had to say about political parties and candidates getting involved in the process in a different way, such as by sending postcards with a QR code or something that links directly to the application. To my way of thinking, and I'm in disagreement even with some in my office, I believe that in year one of an absentee ballot program, we should, as a state, send some sort of explanatory text notice. I would also use that opportunity of spending money on a stamp to explain like where people can go to find their polling location, etc., and that we offer voters an opportunity to opt into a permanent AB list. Permanent is a bit of a misnomer. In many states, permanent means 2 years before you renew. Sometimes it's 4 years, and sometimes it's until the equivalent of a registrar gets a bounce back of an insufficient address. But in any case, I do believe the state needs to communicate this change in year one. When we've discussed this, I remember in 2024, my concern was that it has been such a historic precedent in Connecticut, and judging on how voters were so confused around the rollout of early voting absent that voter education campaign, I would be reluctant to implement such a broad change if there's no voter education without that required mailing. So let me go back. So I think states should do a mailing in year one, allowing people to opt into a permanent AB list. Subsequent to that, I think the town clerks could handle the application phase, and I believe CTCA testified something similar. I definitely do not think we should allow non-governmental entities. Through you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the answer, and I'm certainly sympathetic to your perspective. I do have a few concerns with it, and I agree with you that I think voter education is certainly extremely important, especially when we're going to make what I consider to be significant, really, I mean, like sea change kind of adjustments to the way our election process works. You know, the massive expansion of early voting, I think created tons and tons of confusion. I think in the first primary election, there was almost no turnout anywhere, maybe because the candidates that were on the ballots for both Republican and Democratic primaries, there was not a lot of action. Maybe had something to do with that, but it seemed like a lot of energy and expense and people involved in putting on this process, and very little, 5 people voted, but yet we had the whole town hall modified, people being restricted from access from certain doorways and, all kinds of things going on. And of course, tying up the people that are involved in our elections for a considerable amount of time and commitment that maybe they hadn't even planned on when they ran for that office that they served in. So there was a lot going on. I do think that it was much better in the most recent election. The early voting process seems to have taken shape in a more effective way. I still think the length of time is far longer than it needs to be, but I am pleased to see that there is at least something going on. And I do appreciate the advantage of early voting in the sense that it's still in-person voting. And I guess that leads me to what my questions are, which are your recommendation. Well, let me just, so I asked you whether or not you thought that the state would be sending out unsolicited ballot applications. And it seems to me you're saying no. I'd like to hear that more unequivocally if I could. But the second part of that is you're talking about creating a system where people can, you're going to educate the people of Connecticut at the expense of sending them all a piece of mail to say that they can sign up to become permanent absentee ballot voters. Am I correct about that? Through you, Mr. Chairman?
On the first point, maybe happily, I don't get to pass laws, so I won't be determining that. My recommendation to make any sea change, as you describe it, although, I think there are a lot of people already who think we have no excuse because of the ballot referendum. So I think people have been thinking about this for a couple of years. But my recommendation is that the state send a first-time mailer explaining the new program. Through you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that answer. A few things. First off, I would point out that back during the pandemic, the Secretary of State didn't need any legislation. She took it upon herself, and presumably with the input from the governor and other folks high in our state government, made the determination to send out those ballot applications to everybody on the voter rolls, even though it was quite clear at the time that we did not have universal or no excuse absentee voting. And effectively, and this is something I've argued many, many times, they created it out of thin air. And I don't want to take this committee hearing down an entirely different path, but we do have universal absentee voting with or without this bill. The modification by the Connecticut legislature and what I consider to be a somewhat suspect Supreme Court decision redefined the notion of sickness to basically change it from some individual's sickness, allowing them to vote by absentee, to the mere fact that sickness has existed in the world or might exist in the future, whether it affected the voter individually or not, creating no excuse absentee voting. That's where we are today. That's what we have. And with the addition of the constitutional change, I don't think there's any question that there's no even need for this policy to be before us, because everyone understands that we have no excuse absentee voting. My concern is that, and I think you've acknowledged this yourself, which is that in-person voting is always more secure than absentee voting. What protocol or security will be in place to make sure that the identity of the voter is confirmed at the time that they sign up to be permanent absentee voters? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, sorry, I just jotted some notes. I just want to make it clear that my concern about unsolicited absentee ballot applications has to do with voter confusion. Every time a voter who has not requested an application receives one, they get confused. Registrars get a ton of calls, town clerks get calls, our office gets calls. That is why I'm suggesting that it be localized to the state doing a first-time mailing. Subsequent to that, town clerks would handle it, because since there is no central coordination, sometimes people get like 3 or 4 applications. I also want to be very clear that people often confuse applications with ballots, right? But an application is just that, and it is the job of the town clerk to make sure that one voter gets one ballot. And I also just want to make it clear that I don't think my role is to relitigate what the voters of Connecticut already said they wanted. Like, it's not upon me to say they were wrong. What I am trying to do is create a system that makes it workable and that provides the same safety and security that they expect. In terms of a permanent absentee ballot list, and I just want to make it clear, this is something that exists in many states. I think someone said this earlier today. Unfortunately, Connecticut is very behind how most states run elections. So we are very much in catch-up mode. So most of what we hear in this group is nothing groundbreaking that hasn't been done before, etc. So permanent absentee ballot lists exist in many, many states, and they exist securely. I feel like, is there anything specific from a town clerk perspective that, and just identify yourself. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, Una Pozniak, I am the Assistant Elections Director.
Is your mic?
Sorry, you just have to hit your mic.
Oops, there you go. Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, you can look. Yeah, perfect.
Anna Pozniak, I am the Assistant Elections Director and former town clerk. So from a perspective of a town clerk, when you're ordering ballots, it's very difficult to know how many people would turn out for absentees versus early voting versus at the polls. By having a permanent list, this would help assist town clerks to know ahead of time when they're ordering ballots how many absentees they need. So it will essentially, it will assist the municipalities with the funding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Anna, for those comments, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for your comments as well. I appreciate a lot of things that you said because I agree with much of it. You know, that when folks do receive an unsolicited absentee ballot application, that they're confused. I will tell you that they are even more confused when they receive absentee ballot applications for people that are not them, or for people that have passed away or moved out of state, or people that lived in the same apartment years in the past. And that's what happened in 2020. And that's why I was asking the question about security and verification, because as you pointed out, Connecticut is very behind, I think you said, and that we're playing catch up. And I would agree, but I don't think we're behind in playing catch up on access to voting. What we're behind in playing catch up on is voter integrity protection. You know, other states that have a significant amount of mail-in voting, they have a process for signature verification. They go through the trouble of actually developing a registration process where they capture someone's signature so that it can actually be digitally analyzed at the time that the person votes to see if it's the same signature. And I asked a pretty direct question, which I didn't hear an answer to, and I'm not trying to be hostile, I just want to make sure we come back to this. And that is, what protection is in place to make sure that it's actually the person that is signing up for that permanent absentee ballot status? And the reason why I asked this question is very straightforward, and that is that we had, during a debate on the Senate floor, I think it was probably in 2022, when Senator Bradley was with us, a Democrat senator from the city of Bridgeport, and he declared on the record that he was aware of whole communities of fake voters participating in the process. He said that on the record, and I wish I had grabbed the quote. If I had known, I would have prepared for this conversation. But he said something to the effect of, after his election, he went back and looked, and he found on the voter list a number of people from a singular address that voted in the election, and then he went to that address, and it was a vacant parking lot. So things like that raise concerns. Now, I mean, I didn't experience that. That is the testimony of one of my colleagues, who I presume he was being honest with us when he described that situation. But I can tell you from my own personal experience that I heard from countless constituents saying that they were receiving absentee ballot applications for people that they did not know, even though they had lived in their address for many, many years. That to me is a concern, because the problem with absentee voting, and this is a quote from Senator Martin Looney, who's the Democrat president pro tem of the Senate, the most powerful man in our state government outside the governor, I presume. He said that and again, I wish I had the quote, but he said on the record that you just never actually know who's filling out an absentee ballot. And in my view, we should have absentee voting for certain for people that truly need it. People in our military, people that have a legitimate reason. But when you start opening up the system to any person, regardless of having an excuse, which we have, and the voters voted for it, what you are also doing is you're opening up the opportunity for mistakes to occur, legitimately or illegitimately, and you're opening up the door for fraud. And I believe that it is in our interest, and it is incumbent upon us as the Secretary of State and as the Government Administration and Elections Committee to make sure that as we are following along with the will of the people of Connecticut to expand access to voting, that we're also making sure we put the proper security protocols in place. Is there a mechanism to identify who is completing that form for a permanent absentee ballot status? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, what I know for sure from doing this work the last 3 years is that most of the conversations that we read about and we see in the news or hear about are usually spoken by people who are not part of the election workforce. I spend my time speaking to other secretaries, election administrators from around the country, and AB does not mean automatic ballots, right? It's an absentee ballot application, and every state has processes in place to make sure those applications, when received, are vetted and they go out. You mentioned signature verification, but interestingly enough, in the election community, that's seen as old hat because everyone is starting to switch to ID, unique identification numbers, because it requires less training for the election workforce. I'm sure I remember when I was on this committee, whatever it was, 5 years ago, there was a lot of talk about people's signatures changing over time, and election workers were denying someone access to the ballot based on an incorrect signature. So it was opening states and jurisdictions to lawsuits. Seniors were, some of the groups were against it because as you get older, that's when your hand gets a little shaky, so signatures weren't matching. So the identification numbers are seen. So depending on the state, they might use something like a driver's license number or some other unique ID because it's something that stays with you for life. It doesn't change. You don't need the same types of training as you do to verify a signature. So, and again, I'll turn to Anna to talk about like what the town clerk process is, like whether it's a permanent absentee ballot list or just someone applying under our current system for an absentee ballot. But there are processes in place.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Within our state statutes, there are many checks and balances for the absentee ballot process. There's the serial number envelope that is assigned to the absentee ballot application, which follows through the entire process. From my experience in 2020, we were not getting applications back as much as saying this person didn't live there. It was more of notes saying they weren't happy that they were getting this application. So, coming from a town of 22,000 voters, I don't have a recollection of receiving one of those back. But there are many security measures within the absentee ballot, in addition to signing the applications and then signing the envelope. So within our state statute, we do have some protections already built in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the town clerk, president. Is it right? Former president of the association, yeah, and the secretary of the state for their answers. I have a few things to say. I mean, first off, maybe your a very excellent town clerk in your town, which might have led to the fact that your voter rolls were in very good shape and you did not have a lot of people that didn't belong on the voter rolls. But I can tell you that I heard from, I can't say thousands, but certainly hundreds of people, because I put numerous social media posts asking people about this and they responded. People sent me the actual ballot application documents that were sent to them that they did not request for people that don't reside in their home. There were countless examples, and I actually went through a plethora of them on the Senate floor and during one of our debates to point out that that was an issue. I certainly appreciate the Secretary's comments about signature verification and how people's signatures change and so forth, but that's never happened in Connecticut, because in Connecticut in 2020 during that election when the then Secretary of State sent out all of the ballot applications during the pandemic, the town clerks, as far as I'm told, were instructed to basically accept them all, even without a signature or a simple check mark on the outside of the envelope. So there was never a signature verification process in effect in Connecticut. And I will go back to my question, which is, I appreciate the idea that there is a serial number that follows the ballot application throughout the process, but all that means is that at some point a ballot application was sent to someone, and that person, whoever they are, whether they were the actual voter that was supposed to be returning it or not, filled it out and sent it in. And yes, it follows the process, and if they requested that ballot application, then they are going to receive a ballot too after the process occurs. What is in place to make sure that the person requesting the ballot application is actually the voter? And I'm asking because it's especially concerning when you start to create a program that creates permanent absentee ballot voters that are going to get a ballot application and presumably a ballot automatically going forward. Through you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm not, so are you positing that if I received application at my home that was addressed to Rob Sampson, and I opened it, filled out, I somehow knew your information, filled it out, came up with what I thought your signature would look like, and sent it to the town clerk, what happens? Through you?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm talking about even before that, actually, which is what would actually generate that ballot application coming to your home with my name on it. And who's to suggest that that can't happen?
Through you, I mean, the good thing is I was not secretary in 2020, so I have no idea what happened, right? And so I can't talk about that process, but what I'm recommending for an expanded process is sending that communication that would tell people how to apply. not to send them an application. So I'm not sure I follow the question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. And again, I mean, I don't want to get us too far in the weeds. I mean, I think my question's pretty simple. What is the protocol? What protection do we have from someone requesting an absentee ballot or to go on a permanent list to verify that's actually the person? Given the understanding that people across our state are concerned about the integrity of elections, they genuinely are. I hear from people constantly, and I will also acknowledge, for the sake of this hearing and for the Secretary of State, that most of the concerns I hear are exaggerated, and I don't believe they're happening. But to suggest that somehow people who were sent an absentee ballot application for their elderly parents or for their child that's away in another state at school, in every case, didn't fill one out for that person and send it in and receive a ballot and vote for them, I know it happened. I don't know how many. I don't know if it's 1. I don't know if it's 7. I don't know if it's 700. But I also know elections are often decided by one vote. We had an election in the town of Southington, state representative in 2022, I think it was, decided by one singular vote. And that's my concern. So, and when I hear from Senator Bradley on the floor that he's talking about whole imaginary buildings of people voting in an election, I get concerned that, well, maybe to walk us through it. What is the process? How easy is it to register to vote in the state of Connecticut? Can you just go online and put in your name and address and indicate that you're a eligible voter and suddenly you're registered?
No.
What is the process?
Through you. Let me answer your prior question, and then I might kick it to Anna to give all the details. But so what we are recommending, again, is that the state send a mailing to let people know about the law change and how to apply for an absentee ballot, not sending an application. And then I also believe in the ID number system. It makes a lot more sense to me than signature verification, which has been proven again and again to be so flawed. Something like an ID system where it's a unique identifier that stays with someone throughout their entire voting life. I love that idea. In terms of registering to vote, and please fill in any gaps that I miss. Yes, your name and address. The other fields are either if you're doing it online, obviously your Connecticut driver's license number, our last 4 of your social security number. I think there's one more piece of information I'm missing, but if you are not doing so in person, then when the registrar is processing that paperwork, they are required to send a mailing to the voter. And if there is any other type of ID required, that is requested in that letter before someone is sort of made active on the voter roll. I know this committee already knows there is a difference between inactive and active. So there will often be people on a voter roll that are inactive, but before they are able to vote in the next election, they may need to do something else. Did I leave anything out?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Just to add to some of that, when a person registers to vote, as she mentioned, they supply their driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their social security number. And when the registrar enters that into the central voter registry system, it does send out a message to either the DMV or to the Social Security Administration saying, this is Anna Pozniak, this is her date of birth, and this is the information given. And it sends back a message, if you will, to the registrar that there is a match there. And if there is a match, then a notice is generated, and this notice is then mailed to the individual at that address. If the post office successfully mails that piece of mail to that address, then that person is registered. If the post office returns the envelope back to the registrar saying no known person at that address, then they're have to make that person inactive on the voter rolls. So additionally, if no identification is supplied by the voter through the Help America Vote Act, the first time that they go to vote, they do have to present their ID, and that also does include absentee voting. So the voter would have to make a photocopy of their ID and include that when they're returning back their absentee ballot to the town clerk.
If they don't do it in person.
Yes, that's it. Yep, go ahead.
Hi, Gabe Rosenberg. I'm the Chief of Staff and General Counsel for the Secretary. The one thing that I want to add to that very able explanation is that the overwhelming majority of registrants today, now, are either through the online system or through the DMV. And both of those require a driver's license number. So it's either in the DMV database or it's hitting the DMV database before they are registered.
And I did get that data for 2024. I believe it was somewhere between 83 and 87% of anyone registered in Connecticut are through the DMV.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I appreciate the answers. That's very encouraging to hear. I just want to confirm that this requirement for the driver's license number and or Social Security, are those required fields on the online system? Are they? The person, I'm gathering, they're put in the system unless they're kicked out based on a mismatch or some feedback from the Motor Vehicle Department or Social Security Administration, is the way I'm hearing it. You guys can clear that up with me in a second. And what about same-day registration? What about somebody who comes in without identification at the polls and simply swears that they are John Smith from Wolcott, Connecticut, and they wish to vote, they just moved to town? What about those people? Do we have a mechanism to verify who they are?
Driver's license or last four are required for any type of registration, online or on paper, or as Anna outlined, you have to bring your ID if something is a mismatch, etc. There are methods by which you can vote, such as like a provisional ballot type of thing, or signing an affidavit, I should say, if you don't have your identification with you or something like that. But those ballots are sequestered until that information is verified. For same-day registration, part of the reason anyone who has tried to register on the same day often is like, I was at my polling place, why can't I do it there? Why do I have to go back to the registrar's office or the designated place in your town? And that is because they have to be looked up in the voter registration system, and you need access to that to verify all the information that Anna mentioned. But again, I will lean on my very confident assistant director who spent many years doing this work to walk through the entire process.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So in addition to what Secretary Thomas had mentioned, there is also a process that passed, I believe it was last legislative season or the season prior to that, where there's an affidavit process for an individual who may not have identification, and they have to bring with them another registered voter who has identification to swear an affidavit that they know who this person's identity was. And this was intended because I believe it came from Waterbury, if I'm not mistaken, where a homeless person wanted to register to vote, and there was no mechanism in place for an individual with no ID. And
would you mind walking through the SDR process?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So an individual who wants to vote by or use the same-day voter registration on Election Day would complete a voter registration form, and then they would present that registration form and their identification either to the registrar of voter, or if it's on Election Day, often they will have special registrar of voters to assist them with the process. And very much like how they register a voter, they will enter all the information into CVRS. I should also back up that they will also run a check on CVRS statewide to make sure that name and date of birth does not come up in another municipality. If it does, they have an obligation to reach out to that municipality to confirm that that voter hasn't already cast a ballot in that municipality. And then to go back, they would fill out that application, the ID, the registrar of voters would go into CVRS, enter in the name, and it would come back to let them know that this, is the individual in front of them through the DMV or the Social Security Administration. And once that's done, they are able to cast a ballot, which then goes into an envelope where they sign under the pains and penalties of perjury that they are the person who is on this envelope, and that ballot is held to after 8 o'clock, just in case the municipality comes back to say that, they did cast a ballot. Maybe it was through the absentee ballot process or something like that. But, it's kind of, as I had mentioned earlier, there are many checks and balances within our state statutes to prevent fraud.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all of that. And I do know that the letter of the statute does include a number of checks and balances, as you mentioned. I'm not certain those things play out as they are described in every municipality in every election. We had some circumstances, place in eastern Connecticut last time that was kind of overwhelmed with same day of voters, a lot of Yukon students. And I don't know that those folks had in every case some verification done at the point of sale, for lack of a better term, to make sure that they hadn't voted in another jurisdiction or another state, or that they were even citizens or from America or eligible. And we don't have a good mechanism to adjudicate that, frankly, in Connecticut, unfortunately. But I want to just also clear up, by the way, that, when I mentioned signature verification, I'm not necessarily speaking specifically of signatures. I'm just speaking of a process, which I'm fine with a unique identifier. But we don't have that in Connecticut. We should, but we do not have that type of system. This has been somewhat illuminating, and I appreciate it. I think we could go back and forth for quite a while, and I know there's a lot of people that testify today, and the chairs are probably getting frustrated with me going on and on about stuff that we've hashed out many, many times. But I do want to make it very clear that we do not, I did not hear an answer to what is making sure that we have the identity of the person who's signing up for a permanent absentee ballot. The identification that's been referred to over and over again is not necessarily photo identification in Connecticut. I'm also pretty certain. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I have a couple of other questions, which I did not get to ask on the other bills that we had last time, so I hope the chairs will indulge me just to ask a couple quick questions, which is, there was a bill that we had in the last, are you going to interrupt me, Mr. Chairman?
I was just going to say, we try to keep the questions to the bills that are before us. I think one question you could ask the secretary is whether she'd be willing to sit down with you and answer your questions on these other bills, which I'm sure she would be.
I would say, I think we had 11 bills I testified on Friday. We also submitted, I believe, 13 pages of written testimony. I do not think I am reliable to go through all 11 of those bills today, but I would be happy to sit down and have those conversations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I can appreciate that. And I do want folks watching to know that, I mean, both me and my colleague, Representative Mastrofrancesco, monitored this hearing through the entire thing last time, except for maybe the last several minutes, which I understand you were the last person to testify. You're usually the first person to testify.
It was not my choice.
Madam Secretary, I mean, so for me to not be able to ask the questions that I want to ask on the record for the public, I think is a real problem. And you don't have to answer the questions, but the topics were, I need to understand why we are concerned about having ICE agents near the polls if there is no concern about people that are not voting illegally. And I'm also really want to hear your perspective on the SAVE Act. But again, I understand the chairman's restricting my ability to follow up on questions that are not on the agenda. So
I would love to sit down and talk about how the SAVE Act would increase costs in Connecticut.
Well, I think we have a commitment from the secretary to have that discussion.
Yeah, if I could, though, go back to the bill at question. Senator, you had just mentioned something about having no recourse. I said earlier that Connecticut is behind the rest of the country in a lot of election reforms, but in one area that we are ahead, because I've heard this again and again, we have this independent body, the State Elections Enforcement Commission, and it's quite unique in the country, or it's rare, where every citizen has a private right to action to, if they suspect something is malfeasance, to go to seek, and it will be investigated. That is hugely important. It's an added safeguard in our system that we should recognize does not exist in most other states.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just, my reference was to the fact that there is not a court in this land that will adjudicate a claim about an election or election fraud before your office has the chance to certify an election. And that is because our state constitution is quite clear that it's the legislature that decides those determinations about whether or not an election is to be redone or something to that effect. We've had a number of instances. There was an issue in Stratford a number of years ago where people were provided the wrong ballots, and that election was in question, and the majority party could have put that on the floor to adjudicate that situation, but they've never bothered to take the vote, presumably because they were happy with the results. And I know that in the last election cycle, there were candidates that expressed significant concerns and filed complaints with SEC, but that didn't stop your office from certifying an election, even though those complaints are out there. And we don't know if those will ever be addressed, resolved, and certainly it won't have anything to do with who's serving in that office. So I have significant reservations. I'm not putting you responsible for that, Madam Secretary. That's the way our Constitution's written. But unfortunately, what it does is it makes it a political decision. So whoever's in the majority at that time, if they're satisfied with what the result was in a election that may be in doubt, they don't have to do anything. They can just let it go, and the courts don't want a part of it because of the constitutional requirements. But I wanted to just thank you for your time today. And I know you have more questions coming from Representative Mastrofrancesco.
Sure. Thank you. Through you, it felt like a little bit of that was slightly incorrect.
I wouldn't say incorrect. The only thing that I would add is that is specific to